Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
And welcome once again to On the Money, where we're focused on the UK's cost of living crisis, helping you to beat the squeeze. I'm Liam Halligan, and for the next hour, we'll be talking about North Sea oil and gas. Is pumping more of our own energy the key to UK energy security? We discuss, can domestic energy production help wean us off energy imported from overseas? Plus, as barley prices soar, who knew? So is the cost of a pint. What can we do? All that after the GB News headlines with Tamsin Roberts.
Liam, thank you. Good afternoon from the GB newsroom. It's 1 o'clock. The Queen has appeared outdoors in public for the first time since contracting COVID last month. She travelled from Windsor to Westminster Abbey with Prince Andrew for the Duke of Edinburgh's memorial service. Members of the royal family were greeted with cheers as they arrived for the event. The service of Thanksgiving featured elements Prince Philip had planned for his own funeral, which weren't allowed due to coronavirus restrictions. P&O Ferries has told the government it can't rehire its fired staff. In a letter to the Transport Secretary, the Chief Executive, Peter Hebblethwaite, says complying with the government's request will deliberately cause the company's collapse. He also says he won't resign. He told the Scottish Transport Committee the minimum wage will be paid to all workers if the law is changed.
The route that runs between Scotland and Northern Ireland as a domestic route, we are required pay national minimum wage, and we do pay national minimum wage, and we will continue to pay national minimum wage. And if that were extended elsewhere, we will completely comply with it. And this has not been about rates of pay. This has been about a fundamentally different model.
Sanctioned Chelsea owner Roman Abramovich has attended peace talks between Ukraine and Russia in Turkey. It follows claims the billionaire and 2 Ukrainians may have been poisoned during negotiations in Kiev earlier this month. Ukraine's foreign minister advised the team not to eat or drink anything and to avoid touching surfaces. During a break in talks, a Ukrainian negotiator said enough progress has been made to warrant a meeting of the 2 presidents.
Intensive consultations are underway right now on some of the most important issues, the most important of which is the agreement on international security guarantees for Ukraine, because with this agreement we will be able to end the war as Ukraine needs. The second, very important issue is a ceasefire to solve all the humanitarian problems that have accumulated. They all need an immediate solution.
Well, meanwhile, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has told the Danish parliament that 100,000 people are still stranded in Mariupol. His comments come as new video emerges showing Russian tanks with Z markings heading towards the besieged city. The International Red Cross is urging both sides to secure the safe evacuation of citizens from the area. Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister says they're hoping to open 3 humanitarian corridors. A Russian strike on an administrative building in the port city of Mykolaiv has been captured on CCTV. Local officials say 3 people were killed and 22 were injured in the attack. Rescue workers are still sifting through the rubble after a giant hole was blasted through the side of the regional headquarters building. 20 fixed penalties are set to be issued for lockdown-breaching parties at Downing Street. The Met Police says they'll be referred to the Acro Criminal Office, which will be responsible for handing out the fines. A dozen events were investigated, and the Prime Minister is said to have attended as many as 6. Scotland Yard says there could be more referrals in the future. A missing teenager's school is renewing calls for help to find him. 14-year-old Rashid Al-Safi Bakar disappeared from his home in northwest London over a week ago. Police say it's completely out of character and there's growing concern for his well-being. Landlords who provide substandard social housing are set to be publicly named and shamed as part of plans to improve landlord services. Ministers also want to set up a resident panel so tenants can share their concerns directly with them. The government says it wants to halve the number of non-decent rented homes by 2030. Households are being encouraged to count the plastic packaging they throw away in a week as part of a new campaign to tackle waste. The Big Plastic Count is being run to highlight how much plastic waste is leaving UK homes and how much is actually recycled. Campaigners want the government to commit to halving the UK's single-use plastic by 2025. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, though, let's return to Liam and On the Money.
And on the money today, the Russia-Ukraine conflict and related East-West economic war is causing fuel prices to spiral, of course, for motorists and households more generally. So is pumping more North Sea oil and gas the key to the UK's energy security? And would that help keep fuel prices down? As ever here on The Money, a grown-up discussion with people who really know their stuff. We're also talking pints, the cost of pints. Because as barley prices soar, breweries are warning that the price of your favourite tipple is also set to rise. We talk to the boss of one of Britain's biggest breweries. Plus, it's Startup Britain, where we feature an interesting UK business startup. And today, we're talking to an accountant turned alcohol-free business coach. That's right, Sandra Parker specialises in helping people in business to make sure their lives don't always revolve around alcohol. It's an interesting perspective. She joins us later in the show. Plus, we'll have the latest on the continuing saga of those 800 apparently illegal redundancies at P&O. And as ever, I want your questions, opinions, ideas. What do you think of the issues raised in today's On the Money? Should we pump more oil and gas? GB Views at gbnews.uk, tweet at GBnews or tweet me personally at Liam Halligan. Stay with us. This is GB News on TV, digital radio and online. I'm Liam Halligan and you're on the money. Energy security is now a matter of national security. So says Offshore Energies UK, a lobby group campaigning for more oil and gas to be pumped from the North Sea. Britain could soon be importing 4/5 of the gas we need by 2030, says Offshore Energies UK, unless major investment in the North Sea is allowed to go ahead. And when it comes to oil, Britain now gets more of the black stuff from Norway than we pump for our own wells. Russia's invasion of Ukraine and related sanctions have brought into sharp focus the extent to which Britain relies on imported energy. As oil and gas prices have spiralled on global markets, fuel bills in Britain have soared for motorists and households in general, with energy security rocketing up the political agenda. For years, environmental campaigners have urged the government to slash funding and block new North Sea oil projects. But Business and Energy Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng recently told GB News it would be completely insane for Britain to turn its back on North Sea oil and gas, a sector employing around 250,000 people. Senior oil and gas industry insiders tell me the government does now seem more willing to grant licences to develop new North Sea oil and gas fields. But UK production, which has fallen steadily since the late 90s, could continue to decline unless drilling infrastructure can be updated. The North Sea currently produces 38% of the gas we use in Britain and over oil demand. Offshore Energies UK say that with no new investment, the North Sea could, by 2030, account for just 20% of our gas use, while providing just 30% of the oil that Britain needs. The debate over the North Sea oil and gas is hotting up. Industry insiders want more government help to encourage the energy giants to pump more. Others say those same energy giants, having made huge profits, should be hit with a one-off windfall tax. The public, meanwhile, is getting increasingly irate as fuel and energy bills rise. And that's our on-the-money question today. Is the North Sea key to the UK's energy security? To discuss the future of North Sea oil and gas at this crucial time, I'm joined today by Ross Dornan, Market Intelligence Manager at Offshore Energies UK, which issued the report that we're discussing. We also have, returning to the show, Donica McCarthy, climate columnist for The Independent. Donica, you're welcome. And in the studio, it's friend of the show, Chartered Financial Advisor, Louise Oliver. Nice to see you again, Louise. Welcome all. Let's go firstly to Ross. Tell us about this report that you've put together at Offshore Energies UK, the extent to which we use oil and gas from the North Sea, the extent to which, in your opinion, we could be using that oil and gas.
Yeah, thanks, Liam. I think what we've set out today is just how important oil and gas still is to the UK's energy system. It provides 3/4 of the energy that's used at any time within the UK. And we have to think really strategically about how that landscape is going to evolve. Oil and gas use should decline over time. That's what we should want to see as an economy. But we have to make sure it happens in the right way, and we have to make sure that we've got really secure supplies as we continue to use oil and gas in significant quantities here in the UK. And the best way to do that is to make the most of our domestic resources through investment. If we continue to invest and ramp up investment in our oil and gas resources, and we can manage our production profile roughly in line with how we expect demand to change in the next 10 years or so. But if we don't invest, then production will fall much quicker than that, and we'll become much more reliant on international markets, which isn't going to be good for the customer, and it's not going to be good for our energy security as a country.
Donica, you heard Ross Dornan there. He wants oil and gas use to decline in the round. He accepts the argument we need to wean ourselves off fossil fuels. But at a time when energy prices are spiralling and people are being plunged into absolute poverty, maybe now is not the time to ignore North Sea oil and gas. What do you think?
Well, he would. I mean, the oil industry has been saying they're supporting diminution of oil consumption for a decade. And they can proceed to invest trillions of dollars in more fossil fuels. So we can't take them seriously. The UN General Secretary said this industry basically is a bunch of criminal arsonists setting our planet afire. So taking these Putin supporters at their word doesn't make any sense. Let's face it. Even if we opened every single tap in the North Sea, it wouldn't bring down costs for UK consumers by 1 penny, because it weans us off maybe international market, but it doesn't wean us off the international price. And what we need to be doing is investing in cheaper insulation, renewables, and storage, because all those three will reduce costs for consumers, where this industry will not reduce consumers by a penny. They're a bunch of charlatans.
Louise, let's turn to you. We got Ross Dornan, he and Offshore Energies UK, they really know what they're talking about when it comes to the oil and gas industry. We got Donica McCarthy, who has an equally principled, position resulting from his experience over many years studying these issues. Where do you think the British public as a whole stands?
Well, I think we need a bridge to renewables. Because, yes, it is a really good policy to reduce our reliance on, the carbon emissions and all of that. That's really, really positive. But in order to get to where we want to be, we need to have that bridge, Liam. So to invest in our, North Sea oil and gas, I think is a really positive thing to do, even if it just gets us over the next few years. I also think that we should go to fracking and ban move away from that moratorium that we have on the fracking, because there's a site up in the northeast. It's the Boland site, and apparently there's enough shale gas there to provide us with gas for the next 50 years. So I think that. But
Donica, I'm sure, would say, we'll bring him back in a minute, that's just the shale industry again talking their own book, making promises perhaps that they can't quite fulfil. There's a lot of PR going on here, isn't there? There's a lot of spin going on.
Yes, there is, but we do need to look inwardly. We do need to have our own supplies, and we need to invest here in the UK, and that will help jobs as well. At least the thing with Norway, of course, is they're not a hostile state. We aren't in the situation where, you know, the Germans are, for example, where they have this hostile state that's providing their gas energy supplies. But you know, we're not ready yet to go fully renewable. So I think the UK does need to invest in our North Sea. Definitely, that's my view.
Ross Dornan, as a taxpayer, why should I be investing in the North Sea when the huge energy giants, massive profits they've made, as my mum would say, they're big enough and ugly enough to do their own investing? Are you looking for government help to develop these North Sea wells, which the companies who would support your argument are going to make, again, billions of dollars of profit out of over the years?
So when we say that we are looking for government support for our industry, we're not talking about financial support. What we're talking about is policy, about regulation, and about certainty of our investment conditions in the future. Things like the tax regime, that we know what their tax system is going to look like now and look like in 10 years' time, because that provides investors the confidence to invest. But our industry is about much more than just energy security within the UK. Louise touched on some of the points there. We're an industry which supports more than 200,000 jobs across the length and breadth of the UK. We're an industry which pays significant amounts of tax. We're the highest tax sector, industrial sector within the UK. And over the next 5 years, we're expected to contribute more than £23 billion in taxes to the UK exchequer. But on top of that, we're also an industry who is going to help our advance to net zero and reduction in emissions. That might come as a surprise to people, but our industry is committed to the emissions reduction journey. And that's what our North Sea transition deal is all about, that we agreed with the UK government last year. A lot of the lower carbon solutions that we need to see the scale up in across the UK are going to be driven by companies who are diversifying from the UK oil and gas industry, companies who are redirecting their profits towards investments in offshore wind.
So no room for a windfall tax then, Ross? No room for a windfall tax despite those massive profits that the big energy companies have been making in recent months?
What all a windfall tax would do is to bring instability to the investment climate in the UK, and companies will choose to potentially spend their money elsewhere.
It might raise lots of money to help households that are suffering from huge fuel bills from which a lot of the big oil and gas companies are profiting. Look, I like profit, right? I'm a capitalist. Look me up, card carrying. But I can see the case for a windfall tax.
The structure of the UK offshore oil and gas tax regime is that as companies in the oil and gas industry make more money, then we pay more taxes. So our industry, believe it or not, is actually one that wants to be paying taxes, because that means we're in quite a strong position. If you look at the latest government stats, then forecasts, as I mentioned, we're expected to pay almost £23.5 billion in taxes over the next 5 years. And that's more than £10 billion more than we were forecast to pay just 6 months ago. So I think that what shows to me is that the tax regime here in the UK works. As companies make more money, then we will pay more taxes. And what we need to see is the government choose how they want to spend those taxes in the most effective way to help customers with their bills. So in essence, this is the tax system works. As industry makes more, we pay more, but having stability and certainty of the future in tax conditions means that it's more likely that we'll be able to invest in new energy resources from oil and gas, but also in the future. These companies are the ones that are investing in hydrogen, in wind, and carbon capture and storage. And it's the supply chain companies and the people who work in the oil and gas industry who are going to be the ones that manage these low carbon projects in the future.
Ross, let's bring Donncha McCarthy in. Donncha, you've heard Ross's arguments. You've heard Louise Oliver say that we should raise the moratorium on fracking. What's your view?
Well, it's slightly frustrating to hear this argument again and again. I want one answer from both of them. Will you not admit that fracking produced in the UK will be costed at international prices, and so therefore will not reduce home consumer bills by a penny? And will you accept that if we invested the billions in North Sea oil instead in insulation, we would reduce our dependency on fossil fuels, and we would benefit homeowners for decades to come? Please answer that question. Will fracking gas be priced at international market prices? Because if it is, it won't reduce us by a penny. Please answer it.
I'll put that question in a minute, Donica, and just give us your thoughts on the windfall tax, because this is now a really live debate.
Well, it's nice to be on the same page with you, Liam. I totally agree with you. What we need to do is to produce the windfall tax on the BP and Shell and the other fossil fuel organisations, invested in a programme of insulation across Britain. 6 million homes this winter would have had radically reduced bills if the government hadn't cut the insulation programme in 2012. 6 million homes paying higher bills. Let's produce a windfall tax, invest it in benefits for the poor with universal credit, and invest the rest of it in an insulation programme. That's a win-win for Britain, environment and consumers.
I said I can see the case for a windfall tax, and I know, Donica, a lot of Tory MPs can as well, because some of them have said so on this show and to me privately. So let's go back to Donica's point there. It's an international market for gas, as you know well, Louise. So why is it that fracking could lower our household fuel bills?
Well, the thing is, I'm not really sure whether fracking and shale gas will have the futures market as we have with oil and gas, and whether it will be, pinned to an international market. If it is, then that's quite right. You may have a specific price for the shale gas, in which case that's correct. I do feel, though, that a combination of the North Sea oil and gas and the shale gas would give us a balance to do that moving forwards. I think with regards to the windfall tax, the only problem I have with the windfall tax is that I don't think that our government can be trusted with taxpayers' money. I think that there's an awful lot of waste. And I take the point that if you're a successful business, you pay tax and it's reinvested. But if you think about the waste that's happened, certainly if we refer to the COVID loans, the $4 billion that they've wasted and lent money to businesses, around about 1,500 businesses that actually do not exist. So my fear is that if we do raise this money through taxation, are the government going to channel it into this energy crisis that we're currently, experiencing?
This is a debate that will go on, Louise Oliver. You're staying with us. Donica, thanks a lot for joining us. You're always welcome on the show, and indeed Ross Dornan. We will carry on this discussion. I've said it often here on The Money. This windfall tax is going to get a lot more airtime. It's going to become a very heated debate. Thanks for that discussion. This is On The Money with me, Liam Halligan. Coming up, as the Ukraine crisis pushes up the price of barley, we're looking at how that impacts the cost of beer here in the UK. And we'll hear from the CEO of Young's Brewery, Patrick Dardis, returning to the show for his take on this topic. Stay with us.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're on the money. It's 1:24 here on GB News TV, DAB plus digital radio and online. Now, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has caused a global shortage of barley, as neither country can export large quantities of any foodstuffs, at least not to the West. As barley prices soar, the cost of a pint is also set to rise. The Suffolk brewery Adnams has warned that with barley now 30% more expensive than it was this time last year, price rises for punters in the pubs are inevitable. Joining me to discuss this is Patrick Dardis, CEO of Young's, a brewery which operates hundreds of pubs, employs thousands of people, turns over hundreds of millions of pounds. We also have with us Alex Waugh, who's the director of UK Flour Millers, and Louise Oliver is still with us in the studio. Patrick, good to see you. Welcome back to On the Money. You'll have read that warning from Adnams, a brewery that you'll know well. Just explain to viewers and listeners the impact of barley prices on the price of a pint.
Good afternoon, Liam. Great to be back on the show. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it's not just barley prices, but barley prices alone are driving prices up by as much by 30, 40p a pint. Now, if it was barley alone, we could probably accommodate a standard annual increase, which may be about 10 to 15p a pint. But when you've got unprecedented cost increases like energy over 200%, national living wage, national insurance, pretty much every cost line a business operates at the moment are going up at least 6%. So it's a tsunami of cost increases that I have not seen in my 40 years in the sector.
We're focusing on pints here, but we also have Alex Waugh, who's director of UK Flour Millers. Alex, it's only really in the last few weeks that the British public in general has realised what a soft commodity superpower Russia is, the world's biggest wheat exporter, of course, and indeed the importance of Ukraine, not just in terms of growing crops, but also channeling crops out of Russia and Central Asia through those southern coast Black Sea ports onto world markets. Tell us about flour prices, Alex, and the possible knock-on increase in the price of bread.
OK, well, first of all, wheat is what we make flour from. And the wheat that we're using actually doesn't come from Russia or Ukraine. It's mostly grown in Britain, and we import from Canada and Germany as well. However, as you've been talking about earlier on in the programme, all these costs go up together. So although we're not buying from Ukraine or Russia, they do supply the world market. And because they're out of the market, effectively the world price has gone up. So what we've seen for wheat is during the autumn, because of other factors, wheat prices were already up 30%. And then since the end of January, they're up another 35%. So we're talking about 65% increase since September last year. And that feeds through, of course, into the costs of flour and in the cost of other products which are made from flour. And it's across the board, Liam. So chickens eat wheat, eat grain. So the cost of their animal feed is way up as well. So we haven't seen yet that come through in terms of consumer pricing, but it's bound to happen over the coming months.
Indeed. I keep an eye on the Chicago Exchange, the commodity exchange up there in Illinois in the United States. The dollar price of a bushel of wheat, it was $4 back in 2019. It was $6 already by the end of 2021, so 50% up over a couple of years. And it was up to $12 in early March. It's come back slightly now to between $10 and $11. But as you rightly say, Alex, these are global markets. Louise, a tsunami of price rises, says Patrick Dardis. Price rises everywhere, says Alex Waugh. The Bank of England didn't foresee all this, did it?
No, they didn't. And I was speaking to a master brewer this morning, and he's got a brewery in Sheffield called Triple Point Brewery. And what he has done with his barley, and a few of the producers have done this, is that he's got a contract. So he's got a fixed price, but only until the end of the year. Now, obviously, he's worried about next year. And you know, as your two guests have said, that, you know, it's the logistics, it's the energy prices, it's the tax increases for the staff. The whole thing goes right to the bottom line. Now, he was saying to me that actually he'll probably be able to keep his prices to about a 10% increase. But it's, you know, it's next year that's a worry as well. So, we can't even drown our sorrows with a pint now, can we? You know, everything's going up, so it's trying to look for the good news. The Bank of England got a really difficult task because we're heading potentially towards stagflation.
So high inflation and low growth.
High inflation.
And a stagnating economy.
Low growth. The employment figures are good at the minute. They're not bad. But if we start to see those unemployment figures going the wrong way because we're not going out and eating, we're not going out and buying a pint of beer.
Inflation stops people wanting to invest in new plant, in new factories, in new businesses. Because they don't know what price they're going to get.
They don't know. So we could end up with stagflation, which would be awful because the next thing is recession. So Andrew Bailey's got a really difficult task because it's balancing that, and I think that he will have the this issue of interest rate increases, and he might just soften his approach on that, and bearing in mind where we are at the minute. But it's not good news.
Patrick Dardis, let's go back to you, CEO of Young's. Adnams warned that their price rises will probably becoming later in the year. One should assume that they've hedged their barley prices until then, buying on the forward markets, as Louise Oliver was just explaining. Is that normal with most breweries? When can the punters expect these increases on the price of a pint to come in, reflecting the fact that Ukraine exports about a fifth of the world's barley?
I think most of the pub companies have already put the prices up, and you will have seen some of the press articles from anything from 20p to 45p. So I think most pub companies have gone. I think the concern is that as we get through the year, what happens in the autumn where prices continue to rise? Does that mean that pubcos will have to put a second price increase, which is quite unprecedented? And just to put it into perspective, Liam, if, for example, the pub companies throughout the land, by the way, were to pass on all of the increases that we've had in the last 6 months, a price of a pint would have to rise by about 60 or 70p. So the pub companies and the brewers are actually absorbing a significant amount of the cost pressures already seen. Hoping it won't happen, but unfortunately, I think it may well see unusually a second price increase later down the road, maybe sort of September, October.
And of course, even if we grow our own barley here in the UK, which we do, as we go forward, farmers are paying more for their fertiliser. So much fertiliser comes from Russia, Belarus, Ukraine. Farmers are paying more for their fuel, which drives their machinery. So the cost even of producing locally goes up as well, doesn't it, Patrick?
Well, I don't know of an area of purchasing that hasn't gone up. And if it hasn't, it's about to go up by probably close to 10%. So there is nothing that has actually got away from these cost of living increases. As you mentioned, Liam, already, energy, fuel is driving huge increases up. The demand for the labour, the shortage of labour is driving wages up. I think there are thousands and thousands of businesses at the moment don't have the answer to these cost pressures. And I think as we go through the year, unfortunately, we will see thousands of more jobs will have no option. Either people are going to have to prepare to pay a lot more, or their choice will be reduced significantly because businesses will have to close, causing hundreds of thousands of further job losses, unfortunately.
And Alex Waugh, just briefly finishing with you. Sorry, we're almost out of time. Again, do bread makers, cake makers, the people who use flour in so many of our products, do they generally buy on futures markets? If so, when could those contracts unwind? When are we going to see sharp price rises in literally our daily bread?
So it depends a lot on the particular business's position. The unfortunate thing is that a lot of businesses were going relatively short in the period after Christmas because they'd already seen rising prices before the Ukraine disaster set in, and so they were kind of waiting for things to come back. So actually, what's likely to happen is that those cost increases will come through sooner rather than later because they were some businesses are relatively short. There's quite a variety of positions across there, but there's certainly a lot, I think, still to come out in consumer pricing.
Alex Waugh of UK Flour Millers, we thank you for your expertise, as we do, of course, as ever, Patrick Dardis, the CEO of Young's, and Louise Oliver. Great to have you back in the studio, and we'll have you back again soon. Thanks so much for joining us today here on The Money. This is On The Money with me, Liam Halligan. Coming up today, Startup Britain. We talk to Sandra Parker, a business and life coach whose consultancy, Just the Tonic, specialise in helping busy professionals to live without alcohol. Well, it's one way of dealing with the cost of a pint going up, isn't it? That's after the GB News headlines with Tamsin Roberts.
Thank you, Liam. It's 1:35. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. The Queen has appeared outdoors in public for the first time since contracting COVID last month. She travelled from Windsor to Westminster Abbey for the Duke of Edinburgh's memorial service. Other members of the royal family were greeted with cheers as they arrived for the event. The service of Thanksgiving featured elements Prince Philip had planned for his own funeral, which weren't allowed due to coronavirus restrictions. Russia says it will drastically cut its military activity in Kiev and Chernihiv following talks with Ukraine in Istanbul. The sanctioned Chelsea owner Roman Abramovich is at the negotiations following claims he was poisoned in the Ukrainian capital earlier this month. A Ukrainian negotiator says enough progress has been made to warrant a meeting of the two presidents. Here, a £38 million super yacht has been detained by the National Crime Agency. The vessel, named Fee, docked at Canary Wharf, has been identified as belonging to an unnamed Russian businessman. Russian ships were banned from UK ports at the start of this month. Downing Street has rejected P&O Ferries' claim that sacking 800 seafarers was necessary to protect the company. In a letter to the Transport Secretary, the Chief Executive, Peter Hebblethwaite, said he could not rehire the workers. Earlier today, he told MSPs the minimum wage will be paid to all workers if the law is changed. 20 fixed penalty notices are set to be issued for lockdown-breaching parties at Downing Street. The Met Police says they'll be referred to the Acro Criminal Office, which will be responsible for handing out the fines. A dozen events were investigated. The Prime Minister is thought to have attended as many as 6. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. In a moment, it's back to Liam and On The Money.
Hello again. A mixed bag across the country today, but it's going to turn colder for all of us over the next couple of days, starting across parts of the north today, but with some sleet and snow in the forecast for tomorrow and Thursday. Here's the bigger picture. As I said, it's pretty messy with a few weather fronts lining up, introducing increasingly colder air. We've got a lot of cloud and showers across parts of southern England, extending into southeast Wales and maybe parts of the Midlands. Then a drier, brighter zone with some sunshine over Northern Ireland, western Scotland, and then another weather front bringing more persistent rain and some hill snow to parts of northern Scotland. The colder air just starting to edge in here as well, so temperatures only in single figures. Elsewhere, still pretty mild, obviously considerably cooler than last week, but in the sunny spells, 14 or 15 is possible. Still a few showers then to come this evening over northern England, and this zone of wet weather continuing to track southwards, and the showers turning more and more to snow over northern Scotland, and it could turn quite icy here as well through the early hours. Meanwhile, across the south, it turns a little drier. Again, relatively mild across the south, but that colder air means a pretty extensive frost forming by Wednesday morning across Scotland, and still a potential for icy conditions here through the morning rush hour. Then we've got this zone of wet weather, which is just expanding. It is mostly rain through the day across Northern Ireland, Northern England, parts of Wales. But over the hills of Northern England, starting to turn a little bit more wintry, and the showers still falling as snow over northern Scotland. A largely dry day in southern England, but late on there'll be some showers getting into parts of the southwest and South Wales. And then it's during Wednesday evening that we're a bit concerned about this zone of wet weather tracking southwards and turning more and more to sleet and snow. It's going to be a messy mixture, most of the snow over the hills, but there is a chance you could wake up on Thursday morning to a covering of snow in parts of the Midlands and southern England. Cold air is pushing its way southwards. It is going to feel an awful lot colder for all of us by the end of the week.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're on the money. It's 1:41. Now, the boss of P&O Ferries has hit back at government calls to reinstate the 800 workers the company sacked, insisting a U-turn would cause the firm's collapse. Peter Hebblethwaite said reversing the cuts, which the firm did not consult unions on, would lead to the loss of an additional 2,200 jobs. And today, Hebblethwaite faced questions at the Scottish Parliament. Our reporter Davy Donaldson is there. Davy, how did the testimony go down? I think we've lost Davy. There it is. Davy, go ahead.
Via video link, I was going to say. Yeah, I was going to say, Peter Hebblethwaite, he certainly had a very tough time here appearing via video link. He certainly was grilled. Fiona Hislop asked him first if he had any remorse about what had happened. He said that the whole situation wasn't about him. It then got a bit worse for him because Labour MP Monica Lennon had this to say.
Mr Hebblethwaite, you're leading the committee to believe that P&O Ferries is somehow unique and special and above the law. And it sounds like you have convinced yourself that you are a saviour, that you are saving workers rather than throwing them overboard. The truth is, you are a failure of a chief executive and most likely right now in a crowded field, the most hated man in Britain. I just have a final question. Mr Hebblethwaite, under your leadership, P&O Ferries has executed one of the most widely condemned decisions taken by a UK company. Your ethics are lying at the bottom of the seabed. How do you sleep at night?
It was, look, it was a very difficult decision. It was a decision that we implemented as effectively the only option that, in our opinion, we had. It was a decision that was, as I reiterate, designed to save thousands of jobs.
I've heard enough.
Yeah, well, there we go. Monica Lennon there, the Labour MSP, giving Peter Hebblethwaite, the Chief Executive of P&O, a pretty torrid time. And I think he probably wasn't expecting anything less. One thing that Mr Hebblethwaite did say, he said he wasn't going to resign, which is a surprise to many, I'm sure. He did say that 765 of the 800 workers had accepted a compensation package. So at least they'll get something out of this. But in the meantime, this is an absolute disaster for P&O, a PR disaster. And then we see ships being hauled back in as well due to defects. So where do they go from here? I think that's the big question.
Crikey, Davey, I thought Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, got a bit of a pasting at the Treasury Select Committee yesterday. It was nothing compared to that by the looks of things. I guess one argument P&O would make, one argument they are making, is that they've already agreed terms with about 400, 450 of the workers that they've made redundant. And some of those workers may want to take up those redundancy packages. Do you think that will soften the blow in PR terms for P&O?
I don't think so. I think really when you look at it, Liam, this has been a PR disaster. The fact that workers are in a job 1 minute, let's face it, if we were both called out tomorrow and told we didn't have a job, you wouldn't be best pleased, and it certainly wouldn't be PR for any company if that was to happen. So I don't think they can really recover from this, regardless of what happens in terms of taking packages and glossing over it. This is a disaster for them. There's no doubt about that. You heard the comments there by Monica Lennon, MSP, Labour MSP in Scotland. Very, very cutting, very to the point, and a lot of people would argue very truthful.
David Donaldson there, GBNews Scotland correspondent at the Scottish Parliament in Holyrood on that ongoing scandal about those P&O redundancies. Cheers, Davey. Time now for my regular feature, Startup Britain, in which we showcase some of the UK's most successful and interesting startups. And today, I'm glad to be joined by Sandra Parker. She's the founder of Just the Tonic Coaching, which works with professionals wanting to change their relationship with alcohol. After a long, hard day at work, a few pints or a glass of wine is certainly tempting, but some of us need to be careful we don't overdo it. Now, for Sandra, working as a chartered accountant in the city, the work hard, play hard, drink even harder culture did start to take its toll. She saw a gap in the market, though, for mindful drinking, and so Just the Tonic Coaching was born. And here she is in the studio, Sandra Parker, my latest guest on Startup Britain. Sandra, great to have you here in the studio on The Money. Tell us about your own relationship with alcohol. You don't drink now at all, I understand, but that's not what you thought, where you thought you'd end up when you started this company, is it?
No, not at all. And thank you. Thank you for inviting me. So my own relationship with alcohol, so you can probably tell by my accent, I'm Scottish. I moved into London in my 20s and I worked as a chartered accountant in investment banking and in the corporate field. And long hours. Intense, work hard, play hard culture, right? So I guess I embraced that. But when I hit my 40s, I struggled. Hangovers got worse and I couldn't bear the anxiety the next day when I woke up and I had drank too much and I worried about, what I might have said, what I might have done, the effect it was having on my body. The rest of my life was fairly healthy. So I ran marathons and I learned to meditate, but I realised I didn't have control over alcohol and I knew that I had to do something about it. I never identified as an alcoholic. And I knew something like AA wasn't for me, like not knocking it for anyone else. And so I then discovered how to have a mindset shift so that I didn't need it anymore. And my plan was always to moderate, to be honest, because I couldn't imagine a life without alcohol. Like, I just thought it would be really miserable.
What was the tipping point? Was there a kind of a light bulb moment where you thought, this is too much, I'm going to change? Not in terms of starting the business, we'll come on to that.
Yep.
When you thought for yourself, this is too much?
Yeah, I was on holiday. Every so often I would have a hangover and they would be less frequent, but they seemed to be worse. And I was on holiday and I had a hangover and I just thought, I cannot bear to do this again, right? Like I wiped out a day of my holiday just because I felt rough, and something in me just clicked and said, right, that's it. I'm not going to bury my head in the sand any longer.
And you're in a nice place and you wasted it in a bedroom, which could have been anywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so how did the business come out of that? You were obviously going through a sort of personal moment, if you like, and yet you decided to turn that into a positive by starting a business. Tell us how that happened.
Yeah, I mean, no one was more surprised than me that I gave up completely. And once I gave up alcohol, I realised there was such a stigma about not drinking. You know, people tend to view you suspiciously. And I realised that because of the stigma, that kept a lot of people stuck. I also was shocked to discover I was happier without alcohol. And so I felt like I wanted to share it with other people. And that's why I decided that I wanted to coach other people, just to learn what I had learned and no longer have to need alcohol, but to be able to enjoy their life without it.
And this is your full-time job now. This this supports you and you make a decent living out of it. And do you employ other people, or are you a sole trader?
I'm a sole trader at the moment, but you know, I'm doing really well. So maybe at some point I would expand. Yeah, there's definitely a demand.
And did you have to get qualifications to do this, or it's just you offered a service and it's up to people whether or not they take it all?
No, I got qualified. So I had the benefit of having fabulous life coaches myself who supported me, and I'm qualified as a life coach as well.
Now, you've talked about your Scottishness. You may or may not know, I'm from an Irish background too. Heavy drinking culture in my family. Largely benign, overwhelmingly benign. It is part of the culture. You know, my background, grew up in pubs, never really saw a problem. But as I get older, I do see relations, you know, in the round, and there are problems. Do you think as a whole, Brits as a whole, wherever we're from across our islands, do you think we're a bit complacent about the extent to which drinking does sometimes get out of hand?
I think so. I mean, what I've noticed is how we've completely normalised excessive drinking. Like, I'll give you a couple of examples. Whenever I try to buy one of my female friends a birthday card, it's really hard to find one that doesn't have, like, a bottle of Prosecco or a gin glass or something on it. And I feel like things like bottomless brunches, you know, that was never a thing a couple of years ago. I feel also during the...
Well, you can basically drink as much booze as you can drink, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's all a bit of a laugh. But the problem is, it's all a bit of a laugh, but at the same time, we feel embarrassed to say there's a problem. So that does create a difficult culture.
How would you like to see regulation change? Do you think we need to re-regulate the market for alcohol? For instance, in your own Scotland, the government's introduced, you know, slightly more expensive prices on certain types of alcohol to try and discourage drinking. Is that the answer, or should it come from within? Should it be about self-control so as to not penalise people who just want to have a drink after work and are completely fine with that, and it isn't ruining their life at all, it's enhancing their life?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that banning things and coming down heavy-handed is necessarily the answer. I guess what I would like to see is it be more acceptable to not drink.
Yeah. There's a bit of a suspicion about people who don't drink. Certainly in the city, you know, it's unusual in the media if someone doesn't drink, right?
Yeah. I mean, here's the funny thing. I work with people from a variety of professions, and the one thing they all tell me is there's a big drinking culture where I work. So I would like to see it become more acceptable to say that you're not drinking and not to be treated suspiciously, or then for people to say, well, when are you starting again, or are you still not drinking? You know, if we could just make it okay to not drink.
And I made a little joke because you're coming off the back of an item where we're wondering, God, the price of pints are going up because barley's going up. But I guess one way to tackle the cost of living crisis is to cut back on booze or cut it out altogether, right?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a shocking statistic that I heard that over your lifetime, a person in the UK or the USA, the amount of money they spend on alcohol is the same amount that they could buy a house for.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I understand in order to incentivise your own regime of getting to grips with alcohol, you put money aside, didn't you? And you ended up paying for a big holiday.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at the money that we save, right, it's not just the money from the alcohol, it's getting an Uber when you don't need one.
Yeah.
For me, it was also online shopping when I was drunk. And so...
You really need that garden furniture now.
And I don't even have a garden. Yeah, so the first year I stopped drinking, I went on a cycling trip to Japan. This was pre-pandemic.
Wow.
That was the money that I saved, which is amazing.
So what would you say to those, aside from the fact that your company, Just the Tonic, is life coaching in an alcohol-free way, how about people are thinking about starting a business? I always ask Startup Britain guests this. What is the thing that made you think you can start a business?
For me, it was being authentic. I discovered, to my shock and amazement, how much happier I was being alcohol-free.
Yeah.
And I feel that I can do a good job helping other people because I've been there myself. So for me, it was my own experience, and I'm teaching people the same things that I've learned myself. And I think that authenticity, for me, people really warm to that.
Well, Sandra Parker, it's been great to meet you. Best of luck with your business,
so much.
Just the Tonic. And it's great to have you here in the On The Money studio. Our latest Startup Britain guest there, Sandra Parker. Let's bring in some of your views now on our topics we've been discussing today. Dave says, of course, we should be pumping our own oil and gas. We were talking about the North Sea earlier. We should also be fracking and open cast coal mining too. We should be taking advantage, says Dave, of our own resources. Gareth emailed gbviews@gbnews.uk and he said there's no point in more offshore oil because the price is global. We won't see any advantage in our everyday costs unless we come away from OPEC and price our own barrels. OPEC, of course, is the oil exporters cartel. We're not a part of it, but it does impact global prices. Alex says the only way we could benefit is if the North Sea energy companies were nationalised and if the government controlled the price and stipulated that all oil and gas from the North Sea could only be sold in the UK. That would be a turn up for the books. Richard says, as a result of the invasion, Russia will no longer be trusted, and in time, all oil and gas purchased by Western countries from them will end. And Noel, why can't large companies forfeit some of their profits, Noel says, to accommodate these unprecedented times? Thanks for all your views. Keep your emails and tweets coming. That's all we've got time for today. Thanks for joining me. I'll be back tomorrow at 1 p.m, continuing to focus on the cost of living crisis and helping you beat the squeeze. This is GB News. I'm Liam Halligan, and that was On The Money.
Hello again. A mixed bag across the country today, but it's going to turn colder for all of us over the next couple of days, starting across parts of the north today, but with some sleet and snow in the forecast for tomorrow and Thursday. Here's the bigger picture. As I said, it's pretty messy with a few weather fronts lining up, introducing increasingly colder air. We've got a lot of cloud and showers across parts of southern England, extending into southeast Wales and maybe parts of the Midlands. Then a drier, brighter zone with some sunshine over Northern Ireland, western Scotland, and then another weather front bringing more persistent rain and some hill snow to parts of northern Scotland. The colder air just starting to edge in here as well, so temperatures only in single figures. Elsewhere, still pretty mild. Obviously, considerably cooler than last week, but in the sunny spells, 14 or 15 is possible. Still a few showers then to come this evening over northern England, and this zone of wet weather continuing to track southwards, and the showers turning more and more to snow over northern Scotland. And it could turn quite icy here as well through the early hours. Meanwhile, across the south, it turns a little drier. Again, relatively mild across the south, but that colder air means a pretty extensive frost forming by Wednesday morning across Scotland, and still a potential for icy conditions here through the morning rush hour. Then we've got this zone of wet weather, which is just expanding. It is mostly rain through the day across Northern Ireland, Northern England, parts of Wales, but over the hills of Northern England, starting to turn a little bit more wintry, and the showers still falling as snow over Northern Scotland. A largely dry day in Southern England, but late on there'll be some showers getting into parts of the southwest and South Wales. And then it's during Wednesday evening that we're a bit concerned about this zone of wet weather tracking southwards and turning more and more to sleet and snow. It's going to be a messy mixture, most of the snow over the hills, but there is a chance you could wake up on Thursday morning to a covering of snow in parts of the Midlands and southern England. Cold air is pushing its way southwards. It is going to feel an awful lot colder for all of us by the end of the week.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.
Right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips, where we get stuck into the big issues of the day that we need to be looking at in depth. Nothing is off the table and nobody will be cancelled for saying exactly what they think. Keeping me company today is the political commentator Benedict Spence, and here's what we're going to be discussing on the show. Much ado over a do or two, but with Boris going from domestic zero to Ukrainian hero, is a Partygate putsch now off the cards, even as police issue fines for breaking the law? Her Majesty the Queen attends a memorial to her late husband at Westminster Abbey. With noted absences from America and a prominent role for Andrew, what next for the monarchy as we are poignantly reminded that the Second Elizabethan era is slowly drawing to a close? Will you let your children have the jab? Plans are underway to roll out the COVID vaccine for healthy 5 to 11-year-olds in England from next week. It would have once unleashed outrage. We explore whether it's right to jab children against a virus that does them little harm. That's what we're talking about for the next hour. But what do you need to get off your chest? You can email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet us at gbnews. But first, it's time for the GB News headlines.
Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 2. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. The Queen has made her first major public appearance since contracting COVID last month. She attended Prince Philip's memorial service, with Prince Andrew playing a big role, walking her through Westminster Abbey. The Queen was also joined by other senior members of her family to remember the Duke of Edinburgh. The service of Thanksgiving featured elements Prince Philip had planned for his own funeral, but weren't allowed due to coronavirus restrictions. Russia says it will drastically cut its military activity in Kiev and Chernihiv to create the conditions needed for further talks. It follows negotiations in Turkey, which a sanctioned Chelsea owner, Roman Abramovich, attended. He was reportedly poisoned during talks in Kiev earlier this month, prompting Ukraine's foreign minister to advise his team not to eat or drink anything. A Ukrainian negotiator says enough progress has now been made to warrant a meeting of the two presidents.
Intensive consultations are underway right now on some of the most important issues, the most important of which is the agreement on international security guarantees for Ukraine, because with this agreement, we will be able to end the war as Ukraine needs. The second, very important issue is a ceasefire to solve all the humanitarian problems that have accumulated. They all need an immediate solution.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has told the Danish parliament that 100,000 people are still stranded in Mariupol. His comments come as new video emerges showing Russian tanks with Z markings heading towards the besieged city. The International Red Cross is urging both sides to secure the safe evacuation of citizens from the area. Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister says they're hoping to open 3 humanitarian corridors. Meanwhile, a Russian strike on an administration building in the port city of Mykolaiv has been captured on CCTV. Local officials say 3 people were killed and 22 were injured in the attack. Rescue workers are still sifting through the rubble after the regional headquarters was targeted. Here, a £38 million super yacht has been seized by the National Crime Agency. The vessel, named Fee, docked at Canary Wharf, has been identified as belonging to an unnamed Russian businessman. Russian ships were banned from UK ports at the start of this month. Downing Street has rejected P&O Ferries' claim that sacking 800 staff was necessary to protect the company. In a letter to the Transport Secretary, the Chief Executive, Peter Hebblethwaite, said complying with the government's request to rehire the fired workers would cause the company's collapse. He told MSPs the minimum wage will be paid to all workers if the law is changed.
The route that runs between Scotland and Northern Ireland as a domestic route, we are required to pay national minimum wage, and we do pay national minimum wage, and we will continue to pay national minimum wage. And if that were extended elsewhere, we will completely comply with it. And this has not been about rates of pay. This has been about a fundamentally different model.
20 fixed penalties are set to be issued for lockdown breaching parties at Downing Street. The Met Police says they'll be referred to the Acro Criminal Office, which will be responsible for handing out the fines. A dozen events were investigated, and the Prime Minister is said to have attended as many as 6. Scotland Yard says there could be more referrals in future. A missing teenager's school is renewing calls for help to find him. 14-year-old Rashid Al-Safa Bakar disappeared from his home in northwest London over a week ago. Police say it's completely out of character and there's growing concern for his well-being. Landlords who provide substandard social housing are set to be publicly named and shamed as part of plans to improve landlord services. Ministers also want to set up a resident panel so tenants can share their concerns directly with them. The government says it wants to halve the number of non-decent rented homes by 2030. Households are being encouraged to count the plastic packaging they throw away in a week as part of a campaign to tackle waste. The Big Plastic Count is being run to highlight how much plastic waste is leaving UK homes and how much is actually recycled. Campaigners want the government to commit to halving the UK's single-use plastic by 2025. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, though, let's get straight back to Alex and We Need to Talk About.
There was a time when today's news would have seen MPs queuing round the block to issue their letters of no confidence. The red line for many, when asked if they'd back Boris, was to wait and see what the Met Police did. If the law was broken, he has to go. Well, here we are. We know categorically that the law was broken by some, as cops are now doling out fines. What we don't know is who is on the receiving end. But an educated guess is that number 10 is getting walloped with penalties. But time, and most importantly, context, is a powerful thing. And the last month has seen Boris go from domestic zero to Ukrainian hero. Oh, politics is a cynical old game where righteous principles are suddenly dropped the moment media mood music changes. So is it too late for the Partygate push? His detractors at one time would have said it was crazy to let the man in control of the big red button get boozy, break the law, and then fib about it. Oh, the irony that the tension of the times may be exactly the thing stopping his backbenchers going nuclear. Well, let's cross live to Downing Street and our political correspondent, Tom Harwood. Tom, explain the latest. What's the reaction been so far?
Well, it's quite incredible. We wouldn't imagine where we are today. Even a month or so ago, it seemed like the Prime Minister was on a precipice about to fall. And yet today we've heard directly from the Metropolitan Police that 20 fixed penalty notices have been asked to be issued. Of course, there's a body that the Met Police requests go to that then issues those notices. So they have not, as of yet, actually been issued, but they certainly will be. And then we learn who they go to, or rather those that the notices go to learn that they have received from. There's no obligation for anyone to say that they have received a letter. Of course, the Prime Minister has said that he would say, but we have no confirmation from Number 10 that they would say that anyone else has got one. Indeed, they would not even ask those who worked within Number 10 whether or not they have been issued a notice or not. So a very murky picture overall. However, it does raise some big questions because this is only the start of the process, let alone the middle or the end, because the Met Police this morning said that there was more work to do, more evidence to go over, and indeed potentially more fixed penalty notices to initiate. And therefore this investigation is not yet over, but when it is, Sue Gray will finally release her full report, an update to that report where there'll be further recommendations, potentially further disciplinary measures as well. We are at the start of a long road.
I mean, the difficulty here, of course, is Boris Johnson, when first questioned about these allegations, initially told journalists that no rules were broken and said much the same to Parliament, which puts him in a pretty difficult spot now that we know fines are being issued, meaning categorically rules were broken. The Tory MPs so far seem to be quite quiet. At one point, there were a few of them queuing up to say that that would be the end of Boris Johnson if he was found to have potentially told porkies to Parliament. Has anybody spoken out yet other than opposition benches?
Well, on the opposition benches, of course, we're hearing a lot of people speaking out. That's to be expected. On the Conservative side of the House, however, people have this response, and indeed it's a compelling response from Number 10, that the Met Police investigation is not yet concluded. The Prime Minister has committed to coming to the House to giving a statement when this is all over, but it is not over yet. This is merely the first batch of those fixed penalty notices coming out, and I suppose if you're a detractor of the Prime Minister, you don't want to shoot, you don't want to absolutely get rid of all your gunpowder now. You might want to hold some of that back. Indeed, Prime Minister's questions will no doubt be a flashpoint tomorrow, but further to that, people need to wait and see if the Prime Minister himself has got a fixed penalty notice. People need to wait and see the second bit of that Sue Gray report, which will come after this Met Police investigation finally wraps up. And people need to wait and see what the Prime Minister will say upon the publication of that Sue Gray report. It all feels a little bit deja vu, because throughout the whole of January we were going through this circus, this rigmarole of people saying, wait for Sue Gray's report. Well, nothing can be said until Sue Gray's report comes out. Well, I'm afraid we're basically back in that situation all over again, although mercifully there are other things to talk about as well. Mercifully, perhaps for the position of the Prime Minister, certainly not for the people of the United Kingdom facing the biggest squeeze on living standards in living memory, and indeed the people of Ukraine who are suffering such a horrendous and barbaric onslaught from the troops of Vladimir Putin. Certainly other things to talk about, and that may well be lifting some of the pressure from the Prime Minister, as well as his defence that we need to wait once more for Sue Gray.
Tom, thank you ever so much. Well, here with me in the studio is writer and political commentator Benedict Spench. Oh, Benedict, it's times like this that you realise they're a venal lot, MPs, aren't they? Because they were queuing up, essentially. They sort of licked their fingers, found the direction of the wind to not be in their favour, and were ready to get rid of the bloke, and, well, quite quiet today, aren't they?
They are, and I think a great deal of that is actually because Ukraine has pushed almost everything off the top of the agenda. You know, even the cost of living crisis actually comes second to what is going on in Ukraine. And I think perhaps not unwarranted, people are saying, well, perhaps now is not the best time to act. I mean, for all of the reasons that Tom's just specified there, you know, Sue Gray's report hasn't come out yet. This is only the first tranche of fines and cautions that have been handed out. We don't yet know the full picture, so it would be perhaps a little preemptive to jump in and say, right, we're bringing this back to the top of the agenda and the Prime Minister must go. But I do think that this is, you know, there was a moment to act, you know, right at the sort of the height of the hysteria about it, to perhaps push the Prime Minister. That moment is now gone. And I think probably what will happen is Tory MPs will have to wait until local elections, possibly even a little bit longer, to see actually whether or not this sticks in people's minds, or whether or not something like Ukraine, you know, permanently restores, you know, the loss of trust in the Prime Minister. Because let's be clear, there was a significant loss of trust in the Prime Minister and his government. It doesn't matter how minor the offences were. The fact of the matter is, you know, these were extraordinary times. The people in number 10 were the ones that drew up the rules themselves, and they thought that they could get round the rules and that everybody else would have to abide by them. There's a special sort of, you know, nastiness about that that's been left in people's mouths. Whether or not, you know, Ukraine will have progressed on enough by the time of local elections to perhaps see people forget about it and go, OK, well, that's fine. Whether or not the cost of living crisis will have, you know, ramped up even more and people are, you know, really beginning to feel the pinch, and they'll be sitting there going, and all the while, whilst this was happening, people were partying. You know, we don't know yet. So, you know, it is a very frustrating situation where we're kind of sat here going, nothing really has changed. It will in the next couple of months, certainly. But for now, it's just a little reminder that, yes, this did happen. And actually, yes, the Prime Minister, for all he's done very well on the international stage, domestically, he is on shaky ground, I think.
Yeah, and at some point, there's the sensation that he's going to run out of road, isn't he? Because the Gray report inevitably will come, one assumes, and it will detail in, I think, far more candour than the Met Police are doing, quite what went on during those supposed parties. So as there is this ticking time bomb, so to speak, for Boris, what should the approach be?
I mean, for Boris Johnson, I think he's just got to keep the focus on what his government can do to help alleviate the cost of living crisis and continue to play up the role that the UK is playing in leading the international response on Ukraine. Because that is one thing that, you know, I think as much as his detractors have tried to say that the UK isn't doing enough, actually, the Ukrainians themselves say, actually, the UK is taking the lead on this. This is one thing that most people can agree. Boris Johnson has got pretty much spot on. You know, obviously there are other things that need to be picked up on. Cost of living crisis, as I say, is a real issue, and that is something that the government will need to address. But just focusing on those two things, not letting attention be drawn on these things. And we also have to remember right now that the opposition are not actually doing the best in terms of drawing attention to things like Partygate, because they're too sort of preoccupied by being asked what they think on gender identity. You know, they have pretty much dropped the ball on this, you know, whilst it's going on. So for the time being, just don't touch it and wait and continue to try to do well on other issues, which they are doing, and pray that the public forgive them for that.
Benedict, thank you ever so much. What are your views on this one? Have you forgiven Boris? Were you worked up back then, and in the context of everything going on geopolitically, you think, oh, well, it's all much of a muchness? Or do you still think, at the end of the day, this is the man in control of our nuclear arsenal at a time when who knows what's going to go on with tensions as it is in the world? Can he be trusted, especially if he's found to have lied to Parliament? Email me, gbnews@gbnews.uk, or of course you can tweet us on this or any other issue at GBNews. You're with GB News on TV and DAB radio. Coming up, you couldn't make it up. One moment, Roman Abramovich was the darling owner of Chelsea Football Club. The next, he's delivering hand-scribed notes to Putin and getting poisoned at peace talks. As hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians are now trapped without food and water, we're going to be revisiting what is going on in Ukraine. Stay tuned for that and much more.
Hello again. A mixed bag across the country today, but it's going to turn colder for all of us over the next couple of days, starting across parts of the north today, but with some sleet and snow in the forecast for tomorrow and Thursday. Here's the bigger picture. As I said, it's pretty messy with a few weather fronts lining up, introducing increasingly colder air. We've got a lot of cloud and showers across parts of southern England, extending into southeast Wales and maybe parts of the Midlands. Then a drier, brighter zone with some sunshine over Northern Ireland, western Scotland, and then another weather front bringing more persistent rain and some hill snow to parts of northern Scotland. The colder air just starting to edge in here as well, so temperatures only in single figures. Elsewhere, still pretty mild, obviously considerably cooler than last week, but in the sunny spells, 14 or 15 is possible. Still a few showers then to come this evening over northern England, and this zone of wet weather continuing to track southwards, and the showers turning more and more to snow over northern Scotland, and it could turn quite icy here as well through the early hours. Meanwhile, across the south, it turns a little drier. Again, relatively mild across the south, but that colder air means a pretty extensive frost forming by Wednesday morning across Scotland, and still a potential for icy conditions here through the morning rush hour. Then we've got this zone of wet weather, which is just expanding. It is mostly rain through the day across Northern Ireland, Northern England, parts of Wales, but over the hills of Northern England, starting to turn a little bit more wintry, and the showers still falling as snow over Northern Scotland. A largely dry day in Southern England, but late on there'll be some showers getting into parts of the southwest and South Wales. And then it's during Wednesday evening that we're a bit concerned about this zone of wet weather tracking southwards and turning more and more to sleet and snow. It's going to be a messy mixture, most of the snow over the hills, but there is a chance you could wake up on Thursday morning to a covering of snow in parts of the Midlands and southern England. Cold air is pushing its way southwards. It is going to feel an awful lot colder for all of us by the end of the week.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
Make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.
Right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Well, it's like the stuff of fantasy, isn't it? One moment, Roman Abramovich was the darling owner of Chelsea Football Club. The next, he's delivering hand-scribed notes to Putin and getting poisoned at peace talks. As hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians are now trapped without food and water, the hope was that strangling Putin's kleptocracy of corrupt cronies would eventually flatline the Russian economy and topple the tyrant. After all, a gangster regime with no ill-gotten gains suddenly has little appeal to those ruthless over rubles. As peace talks took place in Turkey, there were suspicions that Russia is merely buying time to re-strategize their invasion. Will the West have to re-strategize their tactic of tough persuasion? Will going after the oligarchs work? Or is the attack On the peace negotiators, a foreboding sign that Kremlin hardliners will stop at nothing to keep their savage war afloat. And if someone does put the boot into Putin, who else lies in wait? Well, someone who knows all about Putin's gangster regime is businessman Bill Browder, whose fund was once Russia's biggest foreign investor. He also wrote the book Red Notice: How I Became Putin's #1 Enemy. Bill, fantastic to have you on the show. Now, you, better than most, know the intricacies of how Putin has controlled his inner circle, his regime, and how it's being kept afloat. Are these sanctions and this squeeze against those closest to him actually going to have a material effect on Putin? Or are there those who are extremely loyal to the president and to this war?
Well, I don't think you should ever anticipate any oligarch in Russia going against Putin, trying to overthrow him, trying to influence him in any way. These oligarchs all exist at Putin's pleasure. At any moment, Putin can get rid of them, impoverish them, kill them. And so these people are only there basically to serve Putin. And what is the service they're providing? They're providing custody services for his money abroad. So when we look at sanctioning these people, we're not looking for them to influence Putin. We're looking for the money that we're freezing to be Putin's money that he doesn't have access to. And that will and can have a big effect on his ability going forward to execute this very expensive war.
There are those who say that Russia is, in the gift of about 300 billion foreign reserves, that this could just be a moment that, given that the invasion so far seems to have stalled, they're taking their time to figure out what next. And some of the noises we're hearing about perhaps wanting to take a tranche of the East and that's all might actually be completely false. What do you think his overall ambitions are, and what should the West be prepared to do?
Well, first of all, Putin's ambitions don't stop with Ukraine. Putin, he's got a very big, grand plan, which is to dominate his part of the world completely and absolutely. Putin's also a person who has never had any history of backing down. He always escalates. And he's also a very dishonest man. He lies about everything he does. And so when we're looking at peace talks and we're looking at announcements of how he intends to conduct his war, we shouldn't believe a single word that he says. We shouldn't trust him in any way. And we should assume that everything he's doing is just tactical to gain an advantage, to persecute a much broader war.
Now, we know that Putin at the moment is still able to use certain financial streams open to him, selling some of his energy cost price to nations who might not have the same resolve as the United West when it comes to trying to handle Russia's aggressions. But how much more pressure can we put on him, and how vulnerable is his regime to these financial pressures and this approach that we've been using to date to try and essentially dry up the regime and dry up the war?
I would argue that the sanctions that have been imposed on Russia today by the UK, US, EU, and other allies are the most significant and dramatic sanctions that have ever been imposed on a country in history. Having said that, they're incomplete. We've talked about sanctioning the oligarchs, and we've sanctioned some of them, but there's 118 people on the Forbes Russia list, and we've only sanctioned about a dozen. We've talked about cutting off the flows of funds to Russia, but the West still consumes between $500 million and $1 billion a day of Russian energy. That has to stop. And so there's a lot more we still can do if the intention is, and I think the intention has to be, to cut off Putin's money so he has no more money to execute this war.
Bill, it's been wonderful speaking to you again. Delightful to have you on the show. That's Bill Browder. Now, I'm also delighted to be joined by former senior military intelligence officer Philip Ingram. Philip, fantastic to speak to you again as well. We've heard earlier that Russia's deputy defense minister hinted that Russian forces may indeed stop the assault on Kiev. Do you think that that is a sign that we could be at the beginning of the end, or is this, just games and bluffing by Putin and Russian forces, enabling them perhaps to buy time and reconfigure their approach to this invasion?
I think it's more an admission that the Russians realise that they have failed, and in a more spectacular way than they thought beforehand. And therefore, they are trying to buy time to allow themselves to reorganise. They may take some troops away from the north of Kiev if they're greater combat powers, if they're going to do what they said and concentrate more on the Donbass region, but they're not going to withdraw all of their troops and they'd replace them, because what they're going to want to do in the positions that they've captured already is to try and pose that as a continuing threat to the Ukrainian defenders, so that Ukrainian defenders can't reorganize themselves and mass against what Russia's doing in the Donbass region. So it's all about fixing the defenders from the Russian perspective and trying to then refocus their efforts into somewhere where they can achieve something. It's all signs that the Russians are in trouble militarily.
Now, should we also take it as a sign or indeed a warning that during the last round of peace negotiations, not the ones today, the previous ones, Abramovich et al., the Ukrainian negotiators, believe that they have been poisoned? Do you think that that's likely to have come from Kremlin insiders and hardliners, essentially sending a message to those who might want to try and stop Putin in his tracks that, well, they're putting themselves at grave risk?
Well, as Bill Browder said, everything is about messaging from Putin and all the rest of it. However, the Abramovich alleged poisoning, and I've deliberately put the word alleged in there because if you look at where the stories have come from, some of it came from those close to Abramovich. Well, those close to Abramovich are close to Putin because Abramovich and Putin are friends, so they're close to Russia. Another came from an unnamed US source. Well, there's too many unknowns in there. There's too much. It may be, it may not be. The symptoms that they brought out are not consistent with nerve agent poisoning, as some people have said it is. The discussions about that he only ate chocolate and drank water. Well, for some of the poisoning, you don't need that. You can touch it on the table. And then who would benefit from it? The Ukrainians certainly wouldn't benefit from Abramovich being poisoned. Russian hardliners, yes, possibly by trying to send a message. Putin at the time, interestingly, was trying to suggest that the Ukrainians and the Americans were working on a chemical warfare and a biological warfare project, and they were circulating documents around a number of people that they said was proof of this. I've seen those documents. They meant nothing. But interestingly, that was the same sort of time. So it would tie in, if it's true, and I'm quite skeptical about that, it would tie in with a potential false flag attempt by the Russians to try and then say, hey, look, we've given what we can. We're trying to negotiate. We've got Abramovich in there. You've poisoned him, so we're going to escalate. But they've suddenly been hit hard militarily, and they're having to do different things.
Philip, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show today. It's always fascinating to hear your intelligent and erudite insights. Philip Ingram there. Well, let's go back to Benedict Stentz. Benedict, there's a risk here that this has become a war of attrition, that basically both sides now, the West will keep trying to pump money and arms into Ukraine, Russia will regroup and try and double down yet again. How on earth can we finally hope that there'll be light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, one does have to hope that peace negotiations, reach some sort of breakthrough. I mean, we talk about how Russia has, militarily not reached all of its objectives, and that's certainly true. But we do also need to be clear: the east of the country, the Donbass, is Russian now. Crimea is not going back to Ukraine. It has achieved those two very minor objectives, and no matter how it tries to paint those as, broader objectives, it has met those minor objectives. It's also achieved broader geopolitical strategic objectives, which is to show that NATO has red lines that it won't cross, even for a country like Ukraine. It will not put planes in the air. It will not risk an escalation. That is a warning sign both to NATO and also to China, and it has shown the world that NATO has its limits. It's also shown to the rest of the world that the rest of the world, it won't act in cahoots with NATO or the United States just because they tell it to. If you look at a map of which countries have actually imposed sanctions, it's pretty stark. Nobody in Latin America, nobody in Africa, the Middle East, China, Asia. It's not happened at all, because most of the rest of the world actually still needs to continue doing business with Russia. So it has achieved those two things. It has shown that, sort of American power is not total anymore, and it can be overcome. It has been pretty disastrous for Russia, and we're not just talking militarily in Ukraine itself. Russia is having to scramble to send troops back to the Caucasus, back to Nagorno-Karabakh, because Azerbaijan is threatening to send troops into the demilitarized zone there. There has been talk about Georgia mobilizing troops in South Ossetia because Russia has moved its peacekeepers out of there. And of course, Japan and the Kuril Islands. Russia moved troops away from that and has now had to send them back and started doing military exercises to try to ward off any hint that Japan could try to make a claim on those islands. So it has not been what you would call a success. But what I would say is this seems a lot more like a sort of a regrouping to take stock of the situation. It wouldn't really be in Vladimir Putin's interests to call a halt to the whole thing now, because that would be an admission of defeat. It would be very difficult to spin Donbass and Crimea, which they already effectively had, as a great victory. So I think you do need to look at this as okay, the first installment of the war didn't go to plan. let's take stock. Let's perhaps put troops back into the peacekeeping areas that we do need them, because we don't want to be embarrassed in other parts of the world. And let's just see what we can do with this. Perhaps we can regroup. Perhaps we can get some other things out of the Ukrainians now that we know that NATO has its red lines and Europe has its red lines that it won't cross.
Bennett, thank you so much for so brilliantly getting us all up to speed with various rumblings around the world. Fascinating stuff. You're with GB News on TV and DAB radio. Coming up, we'll be discussing COVID jabs being offered to healthy 5 to 11-year-olds from next week in England. Will you let your children be vaccinated? Now, though, it's time for a check on the news headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 2:32. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. The Queen has made her first major public appearance since contracting COVID last month. She attended Prince Philip's memorial service, with Prince Andrew playing a big role, escorting her from Windsor Castle and walking her through Westminster Abbey. The service of Thanksgiving featured elements the Duke of Edinburgh had planned for his own funeral, but they weren't allowed due to coronavirus restrictions. Russia says it will drastically cut its military activity in Kiev and Chernihiv to create the conditions needed for further talks. It follows negotiations in Turkey, which the sanctioned Chelsea owner Roman Abramovich attended. A Ukrainian negotiator says enough progress has now been made to warrant a meeting of the two presidents. Here, a £38 million super yacht has been seized by the National Crime Agency. The vessel, named Fee, docked at Canary Wharf, has been identified as belonging to an unnamed Russian businessman. Downing Street has rejected P&O Ferries' claim that sacking 800 staff was necessary to protect the company. In a letter to the Transport Secretary, the Chief Executive, Peter Hebblethwaite, said complying with the government's request to rehire the fired workers would cause the company's collapse. He told MSPs the minimum wage will be paid to all workers if the law is changed. 20 fixed penalties are set to be issued for lockdown-breaching parties at Downing Street. The Met Police says they'll be referred to the Acro Criminal Office, which will be responsible for handing out the fines. A dozen events were investigated, and the Prime Minister is thought to have attended as many as 6. Scotland Yard says there could be more referrals in future. TV, online and DAB Plus radio. This is GB News. In a moment, it's back to Alex, and we need to talk about it, so don't go anywhere.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
We were told, weren't we, that the vaccine was all based on a balance of harms. In fact, certain jabs were even withdrawn from certain groups when it was determined the risk of potential side effects outweighed the risks from contracting the disease. And then a major moral conundrum was born when the government decided they would start vaccinating school kids, despite assurances it was not even being considered. Well, just as the masks go and social distancing is scrapped and the COVID doom scroll has fallen out of news headlines, toys have now started to appear in vaccination centres as we prepare to jab the arms of kids from the age of 5. Where is the moral outrage? And what parent wants their little one to get a vaccine, which perhaps we still don't know much about, when we do know that COVID poses very little risk to children? Why are we doing it? And is it right? Well, joining me now on the show is the Chief Executive of ParentsKind, John Jolly, and NHS GP, Dr. Veena Babu. Veena, I'm going to come to you first. Is it the case that we've learnt more about the vaccinations, we've learnt more about COVID, and that actually the sensible thing to do now is to get children vaccinated?
Hi, Alex. I have to be honest. I don't think a lot of parents are going to be on board with this. There's going to be outrage, exactly as you said, because we just about got the adults convinced to get it done. We're struggling to get parents vaccinate their children with the normal immunization schedule. I'm talking about things like MMR, DTP, polio, all of those things that we have been giving since birth. It's a battle already to give those. And now to say we want to give a COVID jab to 5-year-olds, I just personally don't see how the uptake is going to be positive on this.
Yeah, John, what do you think about children as young as 5 now being able to get COVID jabs?
Yeah, I think parents are very, very divided on this issue. We did a survey a few months back, and that told us really that 50% of parents were really, it was really 50-50 in terms of parents either wanting their children vaccinated or not. But that was looking at primary school children in general. And what we know is the younger the child, the less likely the parents is likely to want their children vaccinated. And so I agree, it's going to be difficult to get parents on board. And actually, for a 5-year-old, basically more, the majority of parents are going to opt not to have it. And I think the health benefits are we're not clear that there's a huge health benefit either.
Yeah, at this stage, it is voluntary. Of course, when they started vaccinating teenagers at school, it was up to the teenagers to decide. But Dr. Veena, I'm certain that as a result of this being voluntary, you will get a lot of parents coming to you saying, what should I do? Should I be vaccinating my child or not? What sort of advice are you going to give them?
We already have, Alex. We already have parents asking us, because when the older groups were being offered it, I do a lot of baby clinics. So in those clinics, a lot of parents come and ask about their, other children. When will we be offered? What should we read? What data should we collect? Because parents obviously want to be well informed. They want to know what's going inside their children's bodies. And rightly so. I'd be the same if I had kids. So as we said to the pregnant women, as we said to the immunocompromised, as we said to every group before, the data is in front of you. We can only say what we know, which is not a lot at this stage. So you have to make the ultimate choice. Yes, of course, there are some benefits, but I personally don't think there's enough data to support or to enforce this upon children. So I would tell them that, in my personal opinion, they should maybe hold off. But if they feel that their child will be really protected, they should go ahead with it.
Yeah, John, it's very difficult when you've got Dr. Veena there, who's a GP, who's being asked those questions by parents saying, well, perhaps hold off, we don't have the data yet. Are you surprised that the government, therefore, has decided to go ahead with this, and perhaps suspicious at the timing that this decision was taken and squirreled out last month as the news headlines were being dominated by lots of other things? And, of course, COVID fell off the agenda because all of the legislation surrounding COVID was pretty much scrapped.
Yeah, I think it's been a conversation, and as I said, this really divides parents. There are those parents who absolutely would never get their child vaccinated, and if you haven't had vaccinations yourself, basically 95% of parents would not actually get their children vaccinated either. But the issue is parents need to actually have that opportunity to make that decision. And I think the government's probably responding to the fact that if you look across the world, a lot of countries are actually making the jabs available to 5-year-old and upwards. So, I think parents have to weigh it up. But I think as my colleague on the interview is saying, there's actually there is not enough evidence to actually justify this in terms of the health benefit. There really isn't. And for some older children, it was around actually the wider benefits to society. But even that's, I would even bring that into question now with the variant that we have at the moment.
Yeah, and Vina, do you think that there is potentially a knock-on effect that could happen here, where because the government are now encouraging parents to vaccinate 5 to 11-year-olds, or at least posing the question to parents about whether or not they should do that this could actually trigger further vaccine scepticism against inoculations that are tried and tested and frankly necessary for public health?
Yeah, I think so. Because people are going to question things, and people are going to always ask the question of how did you come to this decision in such a short space of time? And I think the challenging job will be to convince the audience, to convince the public, to convince the parents. So unless there is robust data, robust evidence, or actual proof that having these vaccinations can reduce adverse outcomes, I don't see how we're going to get the masses on board. And Alex, from what you said, having teddy bears in these centres, I don't think it's going to incentivize these parents. These parents are, because it's not the children walking into the centres, it's the parents taking them. And it's a nice idea, but I don't think it's going to solve the problem.
John Jolly, Vina Babu, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. Now, I want to know what you think. I'm yet to read a single view on Twitter or on comments under news stories from a parent saying, I can't wait, I'm taking my kid to the vaccination centre next week. Are you out there? Is that you? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or of course, tweet us, join the debate at GBNews. Now, the boss of P&O Ferries has hit back at the government's calls to reinstate the 800 workers it sacked, insisting a U-turn would cause the firm to collapse. Peter Hebblethwaite said reversing the cuts, which the firm did not consult unions on, would lead to the loss of an additional 2,200 jobs. Well, today, Mr Hebblethwaite faced questions at the Scottish Parliament. Our reporter, Davy Donaldson, is there. Davy.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Peter Hebblethwaite went before a committee today and was certainly questioned in no uncertain terms. Fiona Hislop asking him have he had any regret over his decision to axe those 800 workers. He didn't have much to say about that. He was certainly pressed by the Labour MSP Monica Lennon, who gave him a tough time.
Mr Hebblethwaite, you're leading the committee to believe that P&O Ferries is somehow unique and special and above the law. And it sounds like you have convinced yourself that you are a saviour, that you are saving workers rather than throwing them overboard. The truth is, you are a failure of a chief executive, and most likely right now, in a crowded field, the most hated man in Britain. I just have a final question. Mr Hebblethwaite, under your leadership, P&O Ferries has executed one of the most widely condemned decisions taken by a UK company. Your ethics are lying at the bottom of the seabed. How do you sleep at night?
It was a very difficult decision. It was a decision that we implemented as effectively the only option that, in our opinion, we had. It was a decision that was, as I reiterate, designed to save thousands of jobs.
Yeah, well, there we go. Most hated man in Britain. Certainly scathing stuff from the Labour MSP, Monica Lennon, along with the other comments as well. 665 of the workers have apparently taken the compensation package, so it looks like it's kind of over and done with. But from a PR perspective, it's certainly not great news for P&O. They've got ferries being called back due to a number of faults. Obviously, the workers' situation, it certainly doesn't look good for them. And on top of that, people Hebblethwaite saying he's not going to resign.
Davey, thank you ever so much for bringing us that report. Well, let's return to Benedict Spence. Benedict, the optics on this are not good for P&O, are they? But frankly, they don't seem very good for Transport Secretary Grant Shapps either, who seems to have very much misread the situation.
I tell you what, I think nobody's in any doubt that the way in which this has been handled has been done pretty badly, although I think that that's more of a sort of a cultural thing across the UK. It's very rare, actually, that you ever come across people being let go from their jobs in a particularly what you might call friendly or humane way in this country. We seem to have quite a cutthroat attitude towards it. But I would actually, I have some sympathy for the company itself in that, we are going to see more of these sorts of incidents, frankly. We keep on talking about there is an economic crisis coming, courtesy of the pandemic, courtesy of the war in Ukraine, courtesy of all sorts of things. This will not be the first, this will not be the last one. There will be other major companies like P&O that really do have to make very difficult decisions. Now, how they decide to communicate or handle those decisions isn't entirely up to them. But this is something we all need to come to terms with. If you shut off your economy for up to 2 years, 18 months, 2 years, there are going to be some very deep, painful things that come as a repercussion of that. And I do think, therefore, you're right, that this actually falls as much on government to explain to people why it is that there are going to be people losing their jobs in pretty awful circumstances, and to explain to those people, right, well, what are you going to do for those people? Because, we were prepared to basically turn off jobs to keep the NHS going. Now the government is going to have to turn around to say to people, this is what we're going to do for you, because it is actually, frankly, pretty inhumane to say to those people who will be out of a job with very few prospects, frankly, well, that's life. We made these political decisions and now you've got to deal with the consequences. There will be a huge reckoning politically down the line for the Conservatives if that is the attitude that they take. So there does need to be some sort of intervention to help these people out. But I would reiterate, P&O, they handled it very badly, worst optics you could ever imagine. They won't be the last. There's more of this sort of thing coming.
Yeah, rather foreboding. Thank you. Now, family reunions can be messy affairs. As the world waited with bated breath to see whether the Queen herself would attend the memorial service to her late husband, Prince Philip, as concerns mount over the nonagenarian monarch's mobility, royals have jetted in from dynasties around the world with a very notable and frankly appalling absence from California. Meanwhile, from one troublesome prince to another, Prince Andrew was seen escorting Her Majesty by car to the service and indeed to her seat. Perhaps a deliberate decision by the Queen to publicly bestow a reprieve on her disgraced son as she pushes the younger royals to the fore and slowly begins her own withdrawal from public duties. Today marked one welcome contrast to the funeral of Prince Philip, with the Queen last year masked and alone, today surrounded by family, many dressed in Edinburgh green to mark the Duke's lifetime of service to the Crown. How relieved we all are to see our nation's grandmother up and on her feet, but how we all must steel ourselves as we realise that today's memorial service poignantly reminds us that nothing, and perhaps most importantly, nobody, lasts forever. Well, joining me now on the show is Editor-in-Chief of Majesty magazine, Ingrid Stewart. Ingrid, it did feel to me like a very poignant memorial service. We're all waiting until the last minute to know if the Queen herself would make it. And perhaps some of the decisions, like giving Prince Andrew back a public role, you might sense the decisions being taken in her twilight years to tie up some loose ends.
Well, I think it was a very public show of solidarity with her favourite son, and it was quite moving, actually. When they arrived together and he was supporting her, and obviously being very discreet, then moved to his place next to Prince Edward. And I found that sent out a message that the Queen has always obviously believed. Of course, there is a sort of bond between mother and son, and she has always believed his innocence. He has always said he was innocent, and she has believed him, and she does believe him. And I think, as you said, it was a very sort of public, view of support.
I mean, nobody wants to talk about it, let alone say it, so I'm not. But there is a sense, isn't there, when you've seen the turbocharging of public appearances by younger royals, especially, and the fact that we haven't really seen the Queen do public engagements, at least out in the open air, for the best part of half a year, that we are all having to brace ourselves for the end of the second Elizabethan era. Do you think this country is ready for a change at the top?
Well, I don't think one's ever ready for a change at the top of somebody that's so respected and so loved as the Queen, and someone that's been there for 70 years. I mean, many people in this country have never known another monarch. And I don't think you're ever ready. I think it will still be a massive shock when she eventually dies, which of course she cannot live forever. And she has looked increasingly frail, but she's very bright and very alert and very together. Now that is the most important thing. She can still do her job, even though her mobility is severely impaired. You know, her brain is together, her mind is together, and she is still there.
And of course, today's memorial service was to the Duke of Edinburgh and the impact he's made on this country and his service to Crown and country. A rather remarkable man, and a reminder when we lost him that perhaps it was the end of a generation to whom we all owe a great deal.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it was Princess Alexandra's husband, Angus Ogilvy, who said, we owe, Prince Philip has done more for us than we will ever know. And during his lifetime, he was joked about, his gaffes were always prominent. I mean, yes, people did speak about his good works, but of course, it's really since his death that people have started to really realise how much he did. And I think this service today was a real celebration of that. And it was simple. It wasn't too long. Well, simple for royal service. It wasn't too long. And it really celebrated his life. And I loved, as you said, that all the senior royal ladies were wearing Duke of Edinburgh green. And it was also very, very nice to see so many children and grandchildren there. So I think it gave the feeling of family as well as applauding his life.
Ingrid, thank you ever so much for coming on the programme. Well, Benedict Spence is still with me. Benedict, I mean, from one lost prince, Prince Philip, to another, Prince Harry, at one point he was heralded as, really at the forefront of the next generation of the monarchy. He was exciting, he was engaging, not even there today. No. How do you think, what sort of shape is the royal family in your opinion?
In many ways, actually, I think it's a good thing that he wasn't there. I think that this was about Her Majesty the Queen, this was about Prince Philip, this wasn't about the drama that surrounds the rest of the royal family. So actually, I think whatever the reasons were for, I'd like to go, give them the benefit of the doubt and say that they didn't attend because actually they didn't want to pull focus, because it would have been pulled. I mean, in much the same way, Prince Andrew being there in attendance, I think you've just got to look past everything else that's happened and say, actually, what was he doing there? He was there for the Queen. He wasn't trying to, I think, rehabilitate himself personally. I think he was just there because the Queen wanted, the family together, such as they were, in the most sort of understated way possible. He didn't sit with them. He sat separately to the rest of the family. He just escorted her in and out. And I think, frankly, given everything else that's gone on, I think a little bit of sort of, care in the family is probably what he ought to be doing. As you've pointed out, she won't be alive for a lot long, perish the thought, but she is quite an elderly lady. So perhaps that is now the role that he will have to play, looking after her in her old age, giving something back to this woman who has stood by him throughout all of his troubles.
Benedict, thank you so much. It's been excellent having you on the show. Superb as always. Always love your analysis. That's all I've got time for. Join me again for We Need to Talk About on GB News. Same time, same place, 2 o'clock tomorrow. Coming up next, of course, it's the briefing with Darren McCaffrey. But first, let's have a little look at the weather forecast. Bye-bye from me.
Hello again. A mixed bag across the country today, but it's going to turn colder for all of us over the next couple of days, starting across parts of the north today, but with some sleet and snow in the forecast for tomorrow and Thursday. Here's the bigger picture. As I said, it's pretty messy with a few weather fronts lining up, introducing increasingly colder air. We've got a lot of cloud and showers across parts of southern England, extending into southeast Wales and maybe parts of the Midlands. Then a drier, brighter zone with some sunshine over Northern Ireland, western Scotland, and then another weather front bringing more persistent rain and some hill snow to parts of northern Scotland. The colder air just starting to edge in here as well, so temperatures only in single figures. Elsewhere, still pretty mild. Obviously, considered to be cooler than last week, but in the sunny spells, 14 or 15 is possible. Still a few showers then to come this evening over northern England, and this zone of wet weather continuing to track southwards, and the showers turning more and more to snow over northern Scotland. And it could turn quite icy here as well through the early hours. Meanwhile, across the south, it turns a little drier. Again, relatively mild across the south, but that colder air means a pretty extensive frost forming by Wednesday morning across Scotland, and still a potential for icy conditions here through the morning rush hour. Then we've got this zone of wet weather, which is just expanding. It is mostly rain through the day across Northern Ireland, Northern England, parts of Wales, but over the hills of Northern England, starting to turn a little bit more wintry, and the showers still falling